In this video, you'll be learning about this topic.
So one of the things that a lot of people wanted to know, because I sent out a tweet that you and I were chatting, I think there was almost 200 questions that, that popped out. But one of the common themes that I saw was people were like, explain what this new world is going to look like. If anything, if I could explain it in physics terms, I think what they're asking is, so we're about to be sucked into a black hole. What's it look like on the other side of the black hole or the light side of the black hole? What is this world look like, assuming Bitcoin does reach this state of adoption that we're using it not only as a store of value, but even as a payment layer? What does that look like from a social, political, workers, unemployment, business owners, residential real estate, like all that kind of stuff?
Oh, just that question. That's all. What does the whole world look like under an entirely different paradigm? By the way, that is the most important question. Because if you can actually paint a picture, today the existing fiat monetary system, structurally, there's no way to save it against technological growth, right? So if you just looked at innovation itself, and if you said society keeps learning, and it makes better and better products more and more, unless you're creating entirely new industries that are bigger than the ones you're destroying, then everything you're talking about in an entrepreneurial process has to be deflationary. Now you add technology to that, and it becomes exponentially deflationary. So you know that that's the thesis of my book, and it's coming up against monetary policy. But the monetary policy said, hey, I just cannot believe people actually can defend it. Because all it is I'm going to cheat. I'm going to just keep on printing money. And so just pause there and think about that. I know for Bitcoiners, they know this, right? But most of the world doesn't know this. And so they actually accept that how much cheating or printing of money is happening to keep them happy. And inflation is just a tax on the people that are most unable to pay it.
Yes.
So inflation is wage deflation. So if I actually wanted to play a game and drive inflation really high, and wages don't keep up with that inflation, then I can actually extend the game of technology because wages become less of the entire picture for longer and drive inequality. And then people come back to me and say, same government say, okay, fix the problem you created by taking more of the money kind of through socialism or something else and redistributing it. That's where we're going. I haven't seen, I wrote the book when I wrote it, it was now over 2 years ago. It was released in January and it predicted all of these events. But I haven't seen yet, not one hard takedown of I'm wrong. That's kind of surprising that it's a bestseller in multiple countries. I've had pot shots, just same as you get in Bitcoin and everything else. But I haven't had one takedown because fundamentally, from first principles, these systems cannot work together. So you're either voting and cheering for manipulation and thinking government can fix it all through more manipulation, or you need to find another way. And so the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that another way. I try not to get too deep in the argument on, even in Bitcoin, kind of there's camps, the KYC rows going through right now and everything else. Here's the biggest point, if you kind of at the highest level. If Bitcoin emerges as a store of value, that is what we're talking about. And when I say if, when, it will. There's no doubt in my mind. Everything else fixes anyways. It's a forcing function. Governments get smaller because they can't get bigger. Everything that is enabled by technology, and so broad-based abundance, is forced through that happening. And if governments try to stop it, it'll move into the second layer.
It's more of a function of how long is it going to take them to figure out to transition into this new set of rules and new environment so that it brings the least amount of pain to the populace that they're representing. That's the real question, right?
That's it. Like when you're talking, some people get so in angst about kind of those people. And there's bad actors in any system. There's probably bad actors in Bitcoin. But it's the system itself that's trying to protect itself. There's actually also a lot of really good people. There's a lot of good people in government that actually probably own Bitcoin themselves and are going to start pushing that forward because they realize it's actually the only way. Because there's two ends of the spectrum. We kind of vote for more government control and totalitarianism on one side, or the free market driven by Bitcoin on the other side. And those are the two ends of the spectrum. And so no matter what happens on Bitcoin as a store of value as it moves, it's going to force the free market. So now let's talk about some of the downstream consequences and everything else. We get caught up in a loop because we're measuring all of our outcomes by the existing fiat monetary policy. And so is everybody else. And it's really hard to say what would it look like in a new world. Because you almost have to hold two contradicting thoughts in your head and investigate them both concurrently and then see it. But it's really hard for people to do. So that's why people get tricked into my house always goes up without realizing it took $185 trillion of stimulus to make that happen. Right? or without asking the next question. It's going to take another 185 trillion to make it happen again. So if you believe that all that stimulus is coming, then housing will still go up. If you believe that stimulus is going to come without taxes going way up, or the next step of what happens, then housing might be a good place. If you don't, there's better investments. Bitcoin, I believe, is a better investment. So now look at what would happen, some of the I call them false prisons. Today, education's free. I put a tweet out on this. And when you and I went to school, it wasn't free, but today it's free. And I mean that we can learn anything from anyone, anywhere for an internet connection. And I mean, top researchers, top everything else. So if you have a curious, driven individual, I can see by your bookshelf behind, you're that person. So am I. Right? So why do we spend all this time in school, 12 years in school, and then 4 years, and then 4 years, paying all that money and time? And we complain of what the cost of schooling is. Why do we do that when it's free? We do that from a past reality where I grew up and our parents grew up because that was the way to get the better job. That's changing really fast. I can tell you I've hired thousands of people, and I can tell you who I would hire every time. So I'm not saying somebody that's not accountable. I'm not saying that they're not driven, but a driven, curious person who's constantly learning, that's the person I want on my team. And so it's free today. So just where do you want to spend your time? And you're going to see a whole bunch of things we thought cost all this money that don't anymore. And we built mausoleums to be able to charge people more money for all of that, to be able to keep the system going, to keep inflation going at all costs, because if it started to crumble, and we put tons of debt in it to keep it going, because if it started to crumble, the Wizard of Oz, you'd pull the curtain back and you'd see what was there all along. And so that's where the society is right now. So there's a whole bunch of those things that we don't even look at. Here's another one. I think it's important for the Bitcoin community. It's important for all of the community. Governments right now are going, and I don't actually care what side of the argument you're on in global warming. I don't care about that. And so I personally believe it is a problem. But if you believe that it is not a problem and everything else and it's overdone, I'm going to give you something on both sides of that will pique people to open their eyes. So no matter what side of that issue you're on the global warming is a problem, we have to solve it. Global warming is an order of magnitude bigger problem because of money printing. If inflation is required and you lower the cost of money to make sure you get inflation, then you have to constantly get more and more things and more and more things and more oil, more and more price. Not real cost of oil. They're not in real terms, right? Inflated. Yeah. And now you need more shipments. You need more of this. You need more labor. You need more everything else, all to keep it going. And then you have a whole bunch of money that's being printed to drive that process that is deflating on the other side, that is taking technology and progress and everything else. So think that through. So energy as one of these deflationary forces, and solar and everything else, in time, gets cheaper and more innovation goes there. And everybody in energy thinks, wow, I'm solving the problem. I'm making the world better. What does government have to do to keep the inflationary system going?
They got to print more.
Exactly. And they have to print double as much to be able to stop what you're doing. So it's a system that's creating the order of magnitude problem to the environment, not any of the, yes, contributes to everything else. But all of those costs would fall. We would not believe how far prices would fall without manipulation. It's so hard to even understand. And so it's a transition to that new world because they're totally different systems that's really hard to fathom. And so that's why people, the MMT, everything else, when you're talking about that, really what you're talking about is a whole bunch of people can't pay for the food, can't pay for their housing, and they're going to go on the street. And in the US right now, it's like, if there's not fiscal stimulus, you're going to see it's crazy what's going on. So you have a whole bunch of people demanding from government to fix the problem the government created with more of the printing that caused it in the first place. But when you look at those people, they have no idea this comes, and they're struggling and everything else. And all of those prices shouldn't be anywhere near where they are. Now, take the opposite example. If you're the existing system, what do?
They have to supply the liquidity to the new transition system, right? Like they got to keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah, and it's creating all this downstream consequence. So if you can print money and lend it out, right? If you can just make up money and lend it out at rates, isn't that usury?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's an infinite interest rate. So if a government can create money for free and then lend it out, isn't it just creating money out of nothing? That any interest rate on it at all is usury, because people are looking individually at a country like the US and monetary policy of the US. Okay, well, so what if it was a different country? Let's say it's China, and I want to expand Belt and Road. Oh, great. I'm going to make up a whole bunch of money. I'm going to lend it to a whole bunch of people, charge them interest, and I'm going to own those countries through my economic engine of manipulating money. So if people could rise up a level and see this is going on all over the world, and it's creating these powerhouses, they have concentration of kind of power and risk to the world, they would see that the US's best bet might be to adopt Bitcoin.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on the next podcast episode and new investing resources.
What are your takeaways and thoughts on this discussion? Let us know in the comments section below.